I've been warning for some time about the dangers of Iran's military entrenchment in Syria. Iran seeks to use Syrian territory to attack Israel for its professed goal of destroying Israel. This morning, Iran brazenly violated Israel's sovereignty. They dispatched an Iranian drone from Syrian territory into Israel, and this demonstrates that our warnings were 100% correct. Israel holds Iran and its Syrian host responsible for today's aggression. We will continue to do whatever is necessary to protect our sovereignty and our security.
Israel launched raids against Iranian and Syrian targets after intercepting and destroying the drone. Israel jets flew into Syria, and the Syrian regime launched anti-aircraft missiles in retaliation. In the end, a plane was hit, going down in northern Israel. In response, Israel says it carried out a second wave of airstrikes on Syria, its heaviest against the country since 1982.
از طریق تقویت تروریسم یا مداخله در کشورهای دیگر یا بمباران کشورهای همسایه می تواند به نتایج مطلوبی برسد در خطا و اشتباه است. ما آمادگی داریم برای امنیت منطقه بیش از گذشته فعال باشیم و در این راستا همکاری همه کشورها را طالب هستیم.
It raises the question, is Israel increasingly being drawn into a fight against Iran and Syria? Christine Pirovolakis, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss all of this, I'm joined from Jerusalem by Alan Baker. He's a former Israeli ambassador and used to be a legal advisor to the Israeli army. In London, we have Russia expert and political commentator Marcus Papadopoulos. And completing our panel, we have Mohammad Marandi. He's a professor at the University of Tehran. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. There's a bunch of things for us to kind of get through here because it's been a busy week, right? We have the Iranian drone. Iran says they didn't send a drone entering Israeli airspace, downed by Israel. Israel bombing Syrian regime positions where they say the Iranians are operating. Syria shooting down an Israeli F-16 jet. And Israel, of course, building a wall along the border with Lebanon that Lebanon says is on their side of the border. Lots to get through, all interconnected, that we will get through over the next 20 minutes or so. But let me begin with a very basic question to you, Alan Baker. At the moment, who is provoking whom? Is Israel provoking Iran or is Iran provoking Israel?
No, the fact that Iran sent a drone into Israeli sovereign territory would appear to me to be an example of a provocation by Iran. So I don't think there's any room for doubt.
No room for doubt, Mohammad Marandi?
Obviously, it's the Israeli regime that's provocative, as it always is. There was no drone, and all drones that are active in Syria, they are there to fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And the Israeli regime, as we all know, is cooperating with Al-Qaeda on its border. The former head of Mossad admitted that the Israelis actually treat the wounded Al-Qaeda soldiers, the Nusra Front soldiers. And the former defense minister of Israel said that once ISIS lobbed a mortar into Israel and immediately apologized. So we know the sort of relationship that they have. And even if, let's imagine that a drone strayed into their territory. Is that comparable to the constant airstrikes that the Israeli regime carries out against Syrian government positions, or the fact that the Israeli regime sends its Air Force jets over Lebanon to attack Syria? There's no comparison. So I think the Israeli regime really has to reconsider what it sees as a provocation.
Yeah, before I bring in Marcus, let me get a response from you, Alan, and just add to it. I mean, what does Israel want? Is it merely to respond and scupper whether it's Hezbollah or other Iranian militias within Syria, or does Israel have greater designs and greater intentions of getting more involved in the Syrian war?
No, Israel's got absolutely no intention of getting involved in anything like that. Israel just wants to ensure its own security, and Israel considers that the presence of Iran in Syria, by Iran's own declarations, it constitutes a very serious threat to Israel. And Israel has warned Iran several times that it won't countenance its presence or its building up of facilities to assist Hezbollah and other terrorist groups in order to attack Israel. And as to the question whether this was or wasn't a drone, and it was or wasn't sent to Israel, well, we have the drone, we have the evidence that it was an Iranian drone, and anybody who doubts that should just look at the film and the footage which shows that this was an Iranian drone and it was sent into Israel. So if anybody doubts that, then he's just imagining and he's deluding himself and deluding your listeners.
Okay, so you both disagree over the drone. I want to pop out into the geopolitics a little. Marcus, one of the reasons why we invited you is you can help us understand the geopolitical angle, especially from the Russian perspective. And they've been interesting because the Israelis have essentially bombed 2 Russian allies in this war in Syria, the Syrian regime and the Iranians. Russia hasn't retaliated. Russia has condemned it, which has led some to believe that the Russians have given the Israelis the green light to act. Is that plausible?
No, I don't believe that's plausible at all. We have to remember that Russia has a very different stance on Israel compared to the stance that the former Soviet Union adopted towards Israel. Now, I don't happen to believe that the current day Russian policy on Israel is actually correct, but under no circumstances did Russia give the green light to Israel to attack Syria at the weekend. Russia is trying to defuse the situation. Russia has a fairly cordial relationship with Israel, and Mr. Putin made it very clear that Syria's sovereignty must be respected, and he told Mr. Netanyahu that in no uncertain terms. But Imran, if I may, the audacity of Israeli officials to cite the argument of sovereignty being violated is really extraordinary. Israel routinely violates Syrian airspace, thereby Syrian sovereignty, thereby international law. And the Israelis do it under the banner of defensive measures. Well, that is absolutely preposterous nonsense. If every country in the world behaved in the same manner as the Israelis do, there would be Armageddon. Israel is not above international law. Israel is not above the mechanisms of the United Nations. If Israel has a complaint, it should take it to the United Nations. And I will say this as well. Why doesn't our Israeli guest explain why Israel does not use its formidable air power against ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the Golan, which is only a stone's throw away from Turkish forces?
That's an interesting
point. Maybe he can answer that question.
That's an interesting point. So, Alan Baker, one of the questions is, as much as you might hate Hezbollah and as much as they might be a national security threat to Israel, there's clear evidence that Hezbollah in the Golan Heights actively fights Khalid bin al-Walid forces, which are a Daesh affiliate, right? So they're fighting them in the Golan Heights, but Israel wants to bomb Hezbollah. Doesn't Marcus make a fair point? Why is Hezbollah more of an enemy than an actual Daesh affiliate in the Golan Heights?
Look, whoever doesn't threaten Israel, Israel's got no reason to defend itself against them. That's the very simple formula.
So you believe it's correct to treat Al-Qaeda fighters
as long as
in your
Hezbollah,
hospitals? Is that correct?
Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. Would you please be cultured and allow me to speak?
I think the world should know why Israel treats wounded Al-Qaeda fighters in their hospitals.
If you're not, I'm sorry, you're interrupting me,
Go ahead,
which is very impolite.
Al-Qaeda is a murderous evil organisation,
no, I'm
and
sorry.
you treat their fighters in your hospitals.
Okay, Marcus,
if you're not allowing me,
Marcus, you made the point a few times. Alan, please go ahead.
If you're not allowing me to speak,
you're allowed to speak. Go ahead,
If you're not
Alan.
allowing me to speak, then there's no sense in continuing this discussion. I'm sorry. My answer to the question was that Israel will act only against those elements that threaten its sovereignty and its security. And if Hezbollah constitutes a threat to Israel's security, then Israel will find it necessary to defend itself. But if Hezbollah is acting against ISIS or whoever else it's acting against, that's got nothing to do with Israel, and it doesn't bother Israel.
Mohammad Marandi, the Israelis believe fundamentally that Iran is using the strategic advantage that it has in Syria right now, with the momentum being with the kind of Russian-Iranian Syrian government alliance. So they believe Iran is using that momentum to create a strategic advantage to then use to attack Israel through Hezbollah and others. Is that nonsense, or might there be some truth to it?
No, the Israelis don't even think that. That's the narrative of Israel. Israel is like its sister apartheid, the sister apartheid regime in South Africa that existed before. The apartheid regime in South Africa would constantly use communism to demonize the ANC.
Will you get to the point?
And the West would support of the apartheid regime. And that is exactly what the Israelis do.
Okay,
so
Alan,
even Nelson Mandela was considered to be a terrorist by the United States.
You're spouting cliches.
He's interrupting
Get to the point. Answer the question.
So this is what Israel does. It uses Iran as a scapegoat to justify the subjugation of the natives in Palestine, the Palestinian people, and to attack neighboring countries. Israel has no drone
that's
of
not the
Iran
subject that we're
over
talking
its territory. It did not shoot it down. The Israelis bombed Syria on regular. And to answer Marcus, because he raised a good question, Marcus asked a good question.
I don't remember what the question was.
Why does Israel not attack ISIS? The defense intelligence chief of Israel
because ISIS isn't attacking Israel.
That Israel would prefer ISIS to the Syrian government, and that Israel is concerned
why should Israel attack
about
ISIS
the
if ISIS
defeat of ISIS.
Isn't attacking Israel?
So when the Minister of Defense, the former Minister of Defense, the former head of Mossad, and the head of military intelligence for Israel speak like that, it shows the relationship between Israel and the extremists.
Alan, let me ask you this.
Israel gives humanitarian assistance. Israel helps people who are wounded.
Can I jump in?
It doesn't matter where they come from.
Okay, Alan, let me ask you. Marcus, I'm going to come to you in a second. Marcus, I'm going to come to you in a second. Alan, let me ask you. Hezbollah, interestingly, said the downing of the Israeli F-16 marked the start of a new strategic phase. And they also said today's developments mean the old equations have categorically ended. When you hear that from Hezbollah, Alan, as somebody who advised the Israeli army, the IDF, what do you think they mean, Alan?
I don't think they mean anything. They're simply persuading themselves that they've achieved a major victory without really taking into consideration what exactly happened on Saturday. How many Iranian and Syrian positions were destroyed as a result of this drone entering into Israeli territory. So they're simply misleading themselves and their public into believing that this was a great victory. They managed to shoot down an Israeli plane. It's a new game. It's a load of rubbish, I'm sorry.
Marcus, you want to jump in?
Al-Qaeda is one of the most vile, repugnant, evil organizations in the world. In fact, one of the most evil that mankind has ever known. It massacred thousands of innocent civilians on 9/11. It massacred civilians in Madrid, in Bali, in London. The list goes on and on and on. And Israel treats Al-Qaeda fighters who have been wounded in battle against the Syrian army. The Israelis treat Al-Qaeda fighters in Israeli hospitals. The world should know that.
We'd even treat you, Marcus,
the world
if
should
you were
know
wounded.
that Israel is allied unofficially to both Al-Qaeda and ISIS. In my opinion, Al-Qaeda fighters should be left to die on the battlefield. But for the Israelis, they treat them in their hospitals and then they send them back into the Golan to fight the Syrian army. You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself for treating Al-Qaeda fighters
Marcus,
and for
we're
supporting
not as cruel
the
as
treatment
you.
of Al-Qaeda
so
fighters.
if your hatred so deep
I think
that
Israel
you're
knows a lot
prepared to
about
leave
cruelty
wounded
towards
people, then you have a
Palestinians.
problem with yourself, Marcus.
You do not
You have a
treat
problem,
Al-Qaeda
Marcus.
fighters.
I suggest you get examined.
Go to Washington, go to New York and say that to the families of the victims of 9/11, that it's a good thing to treat Al-Qaeda fighters. I don't believe it's good to treat Al-Qaeda fighters.
Marcus, you're getting off the point again.
On the battlefield.
Okay, I think
You're
it's
getting
pretty
off
clear
the
that you
point,
both disagree
Marcus.
over this. Okay, fair enough. And Alan says, well, Al-Qaeda's not firing rockets at them, so they don't have a problem with them for the moment. That's where he stands. Marcus, this is where we leave you.
Why don't Al-Qaeda attack Israel? That's a good question, isn't it?
Okay, this is interesting, and you've posed some interesting questions. Marcus, this is where we leave you at this point in the discussion, because we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the border wall in Lebanon, but I thank you so much for your contribution. Alan, you stay where you are. Mohammad Marandi, you stay where you are. Yeah. I want to move on now because Israel's strikes inside Syria are often intended to prevent Iranian weapons reaching Hezbollah in Lebanon. Another way the Israeli government says it's trying to protect itself is by beefing up a wall along the Lebanese border. But since it looks set to pass through Lebanese land, it's only ratcheting up tensions. Here's Christine Provalakis once more.
Good fences don't always make for good neighbors. That's particularly obvious here, where Israel has begun building a concrete wall along its northern border with Lebanon. It will stretch from the Mediterranean Sea in the west, all the way up to the kibbutz of Miskavam in the east. This border is one of the most volatile in the Middle East. It was drawn up by the United Nations almost 2 decades ago to prevent confrontations, with the so-called Blue Line rubber stamping Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Once again, Lebanon has accused Israel of threatening stability and warned against passing through its territory.
This wall, if built, will be considered an assault on Lebanese land, and we have been given instructions to confront this aggression to prevent Israel from building it.
Israel says the wall will be built entirely on its side of the UN-recognized border and considers using barrier structures one of the most effective measures of combating terror and keeping the Lebanese Shia group Hezbollah at bay. The border fence with Lebanon has been upgraded a number of times since it was first built in the 1980s. And the new 6-meter-high concrete and razor wire fence will be similar to what Israel has on its Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian frontiers. But at a price tag of more than $100 million, security hasn't come cheap. Israel and Lebanon are officially in a state of war. Israel fought Hezbollah in 2006. The month-long conflict killed around 1,200 people, mostly civilians in Lebanon, and 160 Israelis, most of them soldiers. Today, hostilities between them have been limited to occasional firing across the border. But days ago, Israel carried out its largest strikes on Iranian targets in Syria in decades. Israeli strikes are often to prevent Iranian munitions from reaching Hezbollah. The United Nations says it's working with both sides as the wall goes up to prevent misunderstanding and decrease tension. But Israel and Lebanon don't just have unresolved land border disputes between them. They are also both claiming an area of sea around 800 square kilometers, believed to be rich in oil and gas reserves. The zone extends along the edge of 3 out of 5 energy blocks that Lebanon put to tender early last year. Israel says it does not seek to escalate an already tense situation. But with territorial and maritime boundary disputes still so strained, could conflict between Israel and Lebanon be on the horizon? Christine Provalakis, the Newsmakers.
I'm joined now by Andrea Tennant II in Beirut. He's the spokesman for the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, which exists to keep the peace along the Israeli-Lebanese border. Andrea, UNIFIL's been around for a long, long time. It's seen lots of problems come and go. What's UNIFIL's position on Israel's decision to build this wall?
At the moment, UNIFIL leadership, our force commander, head of mission, Major General Michael Berry, is working with the parties, is fully engaged with the parties to try to find a common solution to this issue. We have been working for quite some time with both of the parties, IDF and Lebanese Army, in order to find, as I said, a common solutions. It's important to emphasize that in even the last tripartite meeting, there was another one today. That's the moment, that's the meeting where both countries, IDF and Lebanese Army, are meeting together with UNIFIL. They both confirmed their commitment to use UNIFIL and our coordination mechanisms to try to find a solution. So both parties also confirmed their commitment to the cessation of hostilities.
Okay, that's great. Can I ask you very directly, on whose side of the border is it being built? Because the Israelis say it's on their side of the border, the Lebanese say you're building on our land. What's the UN's position?
Well, at the moment, the work they have been carrying out in these days, a few days ago, was south of the blue line, so not in sensitive areas. Around that area, along the blue line, the line of withdrawal, there are several sensitive areas, and that's what we're working on now with the parties to try to find a common solution. At the moment, the work done is south of the blue line, so not in Lebanese territory.
Okay, so south of the blue line, so it seems as if you support the Israeli argument right now. We have the Lebanese Higher Defense Council saying in a statement, this wall, if it is built, will be considered an assault on Lebanese land. Does that give you an indication as to just how much work you have ahead of you in terms of trying to keep the peace?
Yeah, you know, these are very sensitive areas, and that's why a UN peacekeeping mission is there, and that's why we are committed to try to find solutions to these issues and try to decrease tension. It's important also to emphasize that in the last 12 years after the cessation of hostilities in 2006, the south of Lebanon has witnessed one of its quietest period in recent history. And it's important that both parties are willing to preserve the stability. And during all our tripartite meetings, bilateral or trilateral meetings, we have been able to ensure this stability. So even in this case, we are really fully engaged and working hard to ensure that we find a common solution. At the moment, the situation in the south is stable, but as I said, we are fully engaged to find solution to these specific areas.
Andrea Tennenti, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Let's bring back former Israeli Ambassador Alan Baker and Tehran University Professor Mohammad Marandi, and introducing a new guest from Beirut, Hashem Jabbar. He's a retired Lebanese Army general. General Jabbar, good to have you on the program. We just spoke to UNIFIL, and they say that at the moment, all the work that the Israelis are doing is south of the blue line, which means that it's on Israeli territory, so the Lebanese, presumably, should have nothing to worry about. Is that how you see it?
No, not at all. There is a big difference between the blue line and the international border between Lebanon and Israel. The blue line was drawn in 200. Some places, they meet each other, the international border and the blue line. And some places there is difference 1 kilometer. I think when Lebanon said it's inside that its territory, Lebanon is right, absolutely right, and Israel trying to make aggression against Lebanon. And second, and united UNIFIL, and I don't think the UNIFIL has the power to put on Israel, to pressure. UNIFIL is only a coordinator. They have several meetings, the three parties in Nakura, South Lebanon, and they told Israel to stop building. Sometime stop, sometime it continues. I think we have to solve the problem peacefully, because Lebanon did decide to be one strong front against this Israeli threat. Lebanon, people of Lebanon, governments of Lebanon, and the army in Lebanon. And Lebanon will use all means, diplomatic, including military means, to stop Israel to make this aggression.
Let me ask Alan Baker. Alan Baker, so the Israelis feel they need this wall, As you heard from Hashem Jabbar, the Lebanese see it as an aggressive wall and not a defensive wall. Does Israel really need this problem right now? An additional problem? You're fighting the Iranians via proxy in Syria and now poking Hezbollah by building a wall.
Well, let me explain. Before working with the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, I was with Israel's Foreign Ministry, and I was involved in working with the United Nations in demarcating the blue line. Now, there's no such thing as an Israeli-Lebanese boundary. When I was negotiating with the Lebanese in the 1980s, we came to an agreement, but the agreement never entered into force because the Syrians wouldn't allow it, and that would have produced a bilateral, mutually recognized boundary, but there's no such thing. The UN demarcated the blue line, and according to the UN resolution 1701, both parties agreed that they would be behind that line. Now, the reason that Israel is building a wall in various places, not along the whole line, is simply because we're aware of the fact that Hezbollah are planning to carry out various aggressive acts, including taking over Israeli villages and towns. And this is something that we want to prevent, and that's the reason for this wall.
Okay.
If there would be no such threat, then there'd be no need for building this wall.
So, Mohammad Marandi, does that sound reasonable to you? They want to keep out Hezbollah, no more, no less. They're building a wall. This has nothing to do with the greater geopolitics of fighting Iran through Lebanon.
Look, Imran, this is not a proxy war. Lebanon is a country. Hezbollah is defending its territory. Israel invaded Lebanon. Israel killed tens of thousands of people in Lebanon in multiple invasions. So they are defending their country, and they expelled the Israeli regime from their country. So they're a national resistance front. In Syria, the Israelis constantly bomb Syrian army positions in defense of the Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda Syria. This is not a proxy war.
Get back to the
this
point.
Is an attack on the Syrian army in order to help the extremists get the upper hand. So when your guest is uncomfortable, he becomes intolerant about what is going on. The reality on the ground is that the Israeli regime is occupying the Golan Heights, which belongs to Syria, and part of that territory is Syrian territory, which is on the Lebanese border. It is a part of Lebanon. But in any case, at the end of the day, what is important is that Syria has defeated an attempt by the Israeli regime to launch an attack on its country. The Israelis lost a very sophisticated F-16. They pretend that they hurt the Syrians and the Iranians. They did not carry out any significant strike on the Iranians. The Iranians believe that that Netanyahu has been humiliated, so he needs to justify the loss of the F-16. And the Iranians also believe that the real reason behind the attack has more to do with Netanyahu's problems at home. The fact that he and his wife are facing corruption charges is causing him difficulty.
Maybe let's talk about the wall.
And this has led him to carry out these attacks to distract attention away from his problems at home. So, and one other point that I'd like to add at the end is that when the Israeli former head of Mossad said that we treat the Al-Qaeda injured combatants, he also added, when asked by Al Jazeera, the reporter, would you treat Hezbollah combatants? And he said no. So this is not an issue of humanitarian assistance. It is support for extremism, the same extremists that carried out 9/11.
Okay.
And
I don't want to. Okay. And you've made the point, Mohammed.
That.
Both you and Marcus
all
made the point.
All of this is well documented.
Okay. Fair
and
enough.
All of this is in the open.
Fair enough. You made the point, and Marcus made it as well. General Jabbar, let me bring you in here because, from the Lebanese perspective, I doubt many people want a repeat of 2006 and prior conflicts, because while it might be triggered by Hezbollah and Israel, it becomes Israel versus all of Lebanon, essentially. You've got a complicated country and political system, but Lebanon suffers a whole lot when that happens. Are you preparing for the worst, given everything we've discussed, everything regarding what's happening in Syria, everything regarding what's happening on the border with Lebanon? You've been around for a long, long time. Should we all be preparing for another war in Lebanon that's going to happen with Israel?
No, no at all. Israel want every day revenge since 2006. Every year prepare a war against Lebanon. But Israel discover at the end of the day, it cannot face that war and have the consequences of this war. And year after year, they discover Hezbollah became stronger and stronger, and this is the closed cycle. Israel will not involve itself in a war against Lebanon.
Unfortunately, I've got to wrap because we have gone over time. General Jabbar, I do apologize. I have to wrap because we're completely out of time in the segment and we're going to lose all of you at the moment. The fault is all mine.
Can't I respond? Can't I respond to
I'm
this?
sorry, Alan, because we're completely out of time. The fault is mine. I apologize, but I hope you feel on the balance of the discussion, everybody had a fair amount to say. Alan Baker, Hashem Jabbar, Mohammad Marandi.
No, I think I've been the target of everybody, and I'm entitled to respond. And you know, Lebanon is a beautiful country, but it's been taken hostage by Hezbollah, and they're ruining the country. And the general is in a very unfortunate
beautiful country.
position.
That's why Israel wants to invade it all the time. That's why the Israelis go and massacre
Israel protected
Palestinians
itself
in
against
the
Hezbollah.
refugee camps because they
Okay,
love Lebanon.
I've traveled extensively in
without
Lebanon.
Palestinians and Lebanese.
Okay, Alan, I hope you consider that sufficient as a response. I hope you consider that sufficient as a response. Mohammed, Alan, Hisham, I apologize, but I really have to move on. I've got other segments to get to.
Leave Lebanon alone.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Hope you'll come back on the show.